Welcome to Politics for Thinkers.
Hi, welcome to Politics for Thinkers. This is the first edition. I'm Jennifer Barreto Leiva, the host and executive producer of this new show. The reason why I decided to create this new project is because I'm very tired and ashamed as a journalist of the level of journalism has achieved lately. It all comes to name calling, accusation, violence, gossip, and everything but journalism. And on the top of that, I firmly agree with the fact that we need to elevate the tone of the conversation when it comes to politics. I'm a truth seeker, and for me, it's very important to ask all kind of questions in order to present whatever is happened to my audience. So we will have conversation with new faces. We will have these kind of conversations that you may not see in mainstream media, but for me, it's very important that you, as a citizen, um, have the answers of all the questions that you may ask to yourself and you don't find any answers. Um, Charlie Kirk, God bless his soul, used to say that in order to be free, we need to ask questions. And it's exactly what I'm going to do here. Being said this, it's time to introduce my guest. Daniel Marte is a renowned academic and professional with a distinguished career in political science and international relations. He earned his doctorate from the prestigious Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and holds two master's degrees from the same institution, a Master of Public Administration and a Master of Business Administration. Additionally, he holds a Master of Information Systems and Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Maryland, College Park. Through his career, Daniel has enriched his academic background with ministerial certificates from recognized institutions such as the Assemblies of God, Berean School of the Bible, and Global University. Currently, he serves as online professor at Georgetown University, McCourt School of Public Policy, and NYU Wilf Family Department of Politics, where he teaches specialized courses in political science, international politics, and Middle Eastern politics. Daniel's passion for teaching is complemented by his dedication to research and writing. He's the author of a book based on his doctoral dissertation, which is used as a reference text as leading U.S. universities and institutions, including National Defense University, National War College, Army War College, American University for School of Public Policy. With over 35 years of combined experience in the U.S. Armed Forces and the U.S. Department of State, Daniel has worked extensively in national security and intelligence. Furthermore, he has served as an advisor to the U.S. Congressional Intelligence and Defense Committees supporting both the House of Representatives and the state and the Senate. Welcome, Daniel. Thank you for being here with us.
It's a pleasure for me to be here and actually to be sharing this program and the first episode with you, Jennifer. Like I said, it's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The first question I would like to ask you is uh, related to the whole Iran conflict. There was an actual threat to the United States and the security of the world for that justified launching the Operation Epic Fury and Roaring Lion.
A lot of people, usually when it comes to being opinionated, they say things that are based on baseless facts, and that's an oxymoron, because when we say opinion on baseless facts, of course they are not facts. They are just plain and simple opinions coming from most of the time misinformation. And people say, that the United States had no reason to initiate, a campaign over Iran, when actually all you have to do is go back to history, go back to the last 40 years, and you will see the reason that the United States initiated this campaign over Iran. Also, at the same time, people say, "Oh, Israel pushed the United States to attack Iran," and again, saying that there is no reason for Israel to wanting to push United States to attack Iran, and that Israel had no reason to attack Iran. Well, again, people sometimes decide to say, "I let me forget history. Let me forget, what actually happens beforehand, and let me concentrate on only what I want to believe. Let me only concentrate on what I believe are the facts that are true." Well, we have to understand that Iran, for the last few years, just from 2022 on, just for the last couple of years, have been launching missiles from Iran to Israel. Iran has to use the proxies, from Gaza and from Lebanon, to launch attacks from their jurisdictions to Israel. And also some people want to avoid discussing that in order to justify the way they think, and that's not being honest. And then if you follow the news media, or the news cycles around the United States, and it's sad to say, but some Latin American countries decide to also follow the same market. They also repeat most of the time that they actually have to align themselves with that news cycle, and they usually don't want to see what's happening beforehand. So, to summarize and to answer that question, yes, there were facts that will justify what the U.S. and Israeli governments have done and continue doing to engage with Iran. So definitely yes. The question, sometimes I get overwinded, explaining, because sometimes I tell people, a simple question sometimes it's difficult to give a simple answer. It's nothing that you can actually write on a napkin, the answer, and you have to go a little bit further, because in international policy, geopolitics are not simple to explain. You have to give the background. You have to give more than a little bit of a simple yes or no answer.
Yes, absolutely. That's the reason why I wanted to brought you here, because no one could explain this better than you. The alliance with Russia and China, this triangle of horror they create, Iran, China, and Russia, it scared the hell out of me. And people seems to not get the whole picture of the humongous risk the entire planet was running if Iran kept going the way it was. So it was a very necessary operation. I strongly agree with you.
Sometimes we have to understand that not all threats are meant to be military. Not all
Mhm.
threats are meant to be, a nuclear bomb. Not all threats are meant to be a missile, being launched. Sometimes we have to understand that in geopolitics, especially, in geopolitics, you have to talk about economics. You have to talk about politics by itself. You have to talk about geography. You have to talk about people. You have to talk about, cultures. Geopolitics, is so a huge part of the political sciences, and social sciences, that when I see people, giving their opinion about geopolitics, I see, hold on a minute, geopolitics is not only one side of a political science spectrum or the social sciences spectrum. It covers, so many things about political science and the social sciences, that you cannot just give a plain and simple opinion about something. So, for example, you mentioned, Russia and China and Iran. Well, for example, what happens with Russia? Well, you cannot see Russia by itself and alone and Iran. You have to understand that Russia is having a war with, his nemesis, and who is Russia's nemesis at the moment, you know? So when you see that Russia is fighting a war against who? Who is Russia fighting with or against? So you have to understand that Russia is depending on Iran to supply Russia with weapons, especially drones, to go ahead and continue the war, you know, against Zelensky. And Zelensky is who? Who is Zelensky? Is president of who? So sometimes, I don't mention names because I want people to actually say, okay, now you understand that there's another country involved in a conflict. So that conflict actually has to do also with Iran, because Iran is not only the Middle East, it's not only, the Far East. There is also happening in the Balkans that we have to look. Okay, so now we have that conflict with Russia, but now we have to look at China. You see, we're not talking about the Middle East. We're not talking about, Lebanon. We're not talking about Gaza. So now we have to look, and we're not talking about Russia now. Let's talk about China. So what's wrong with China? Well, China is depending completely on Iran's oil. So China is practically depending almost 80% of its oil on Iran. So China is building up an infrastructure based on oil, and they are exporting their goods and becoming a great, it's not that China is not by itself a great, economy. It is a great economy, and people see China as a communist country. Well, they are very far from the truth. you know China by itself might be a country on politics, but on economy it's not. They have people that are becoming richer every single day. They are exporting products. They have people that are entrepreneurs. They have people that actually are building, wealth. Why? Because they are depending on others people to actually build up a stronger China. Are there poor people in China? Yes, they are. But there are also rich people in China. They are not part of the party, the Communist Party. So you see a China
Mhm.
that is building all this and also withholding some of that oil for their own purposes. So when you see that and you say, okay, so at one point, if you don't do something, you are creating either a vacuum or you are creating a strong alliance. I don't know if you remember a few years back that there was the evil, you know, uh, pact that presidents of the United States were talking about Korea, and even Russia, you know, and they were talking about this the axis of the evil. That was the right name they used to call it, the axis of evil. Where why they were so worried? Because since we never took action against North Korea, now we fear that North Korea is possible at the verge of having a nuclear weapon. And then, if something happens to South Korea, which is only a parallel line, the 35th parallel, we're going to say, oh, wow, look at what happened to South Korea and to Japan. Because if we see the different type of missile tests that has been going on of North Korea, they're happening close to Japan, close to the coast of South Korea, and they're testing missiles that can reach vast amounts of territory, and who knows, they can even reach the west coast of the United States. But since before President Trump, before we did anything, we had to request permission, to other nations. And now we have a country that is not a signature of the different treaties. So we have a country that might have, assuming, right? Because we cannot tell for certain if they have it or not, may have a nuclear weapon. But now we have another country in the Middle East that has sworn to kill, to eliminate the only democratic country in the Middle East, also almost having a nuclear weapon. So if we think about it, if we actually put our minds to it, not propaganda. I'm not talking about propaganda. I'm talking about facts. See, sometimes we try to forget our history. Sometimes we're trying to forget the facts. We have to actually look. That's why I say, one of my critiques, especially around Latin America, Puerto Rico, is that we have a lot of political analysts. We have military analysts, quote unquote. We have geopolitical analysts, quote unquote, that or sometimes they spew a lot of information, a lot of opinions, but based on what? Based on what? When you are a real analyst, the word analyst means that you have to analyze. It means that you have documents. It means that you have information. It means that you have to investigate. It means that you have to go further. It means that you have to actually look into something in order to be able to analyze. Sometimes our analysts, they just base their information on gossip. They base their information on what? So that's something that myself scares the heck out of me. Not so much, the axis, of China, Russia and Iran. It is scary. It is scary when you think about it. It is scary when you say, "Wow, Russia, China." But at the same time, when you see a country or a set of countries that decide to take action, so even you know, those big countries, militarily, economically, take a step back and decide, oh, hold on a minute. Even though there are some major conflict in my friend, but I'm not going to take a side. Because where is Russia in all this with Iran? Where is China in all this with Iran? mostly quiet. As a matter of fact, some people say, I don't know if it's true or not, but some people say that China is trying to convince, Iran to hold on, your choke on the Strait of Hormuz is causing a lot of problems necessarily. So how about if we, hold on? How about if we reconsider, those things that you're saying? So that's why we have to be extremely careful, and for me, the disinformation that is running around some circles is more dangerous and more uh, difficult to swallow than even those alliances that the big big guns might have, because you see, most of the things that happens because we the people, and that's a big phrase, that we see in the Constitution, we the people, uh, we are capable of doing. We hear this information, and what happens? We have, demonstrations, we have rallies, people saying death to Israel. We see people, death to X and Y. Then we have conspiracies, here and there. Oh, we are doing this because, we are being misinformed. Well, sometimes, the people that are protesting are the ones being misinformed. And they don't take the time to actually, think about it. And there is something that, again, geopolitics involves so many ways to see things. You have something called misinformation, you have something called psychological operations, you have something called, I will never, finish, explaining what geopolitics are, you know and
Yeah.
even, you know even the way our president sometimes, say things. People say, oh, the president said that. Well, okay, don't take it so literally. Sometimes the president say stuff just to give, a twist, and make people, getting into an awe, and say, oh, hold on, this is happening. you know Hold on, think about it. Do you think that actually, you know for example, and then I will, I know I'm talking a lot. You see people, today on the media, people saying, well, we have over 50 people, senators and representatives, signing a letter that they want to use Article 25th of the Constitution to impeach, President Trump. Okay. And, you know, if you are informed and if you know what you're talking about, you will see that even the whole Senate, even the whole, House of Representatives can sign a document. That doesn't mean they can impeach, or they can, invoke the 25th Amendment, not impeachment. Invoke the 25th Amendment. Why? Because the 25th Amendment only can start by either the vice president and being signed by the members of the cabinet. And that's explicitly say on the Constitution. Members of the Senate and members of the House of Representatives cannot start any proceedings of the 25th Amendment. It's
Mm.
only the vice president and members of the cabinet, not Senate, not members of the House of Representatives. But people that don't understand that start saying, "Oh, there's going to be impeachment. They're going to be, using the 25th Amendment to make, President Trump resign." Wake up and smell your coffee. It's not happening, because you need to follow the procedure. You need to follow the
Yes.
same Constitution. But since people just, they are like a little monkey, they just spew what they read without checking for facts. Now I keep my
Yeah.
mouth shut.
That's exactly the reason why I started this project, this show, because journalism is about to be dead, and it has become into a he said, she said, name calling. Last week, I saw a journalist calling a transvestite a lady because he doesn't like what she says. I don't agree with that. I didn't went to college for this. And the language they're using, they are dropping F bombs like they are praying, you know? I'm a Christian woman. I'm a lady. I work hard on my degree, and I cannot be with my arms crossed while this whole thing is happening. There is a lot of propaganda. There is a lot of coordinator attacks, as this one I've mentioned it. There is a lot of analysts. I call them talkers because they are not analysts. So the truth is dying, and I'm a truth seeker, and I had to do something. That's the reason, for anyone is wondering out there. That's the main reason why I started the show. Now that we have a more clear panorama about this operation, Operation Fury, what is the aftermath after these two operations happened? Is going to compromise global security? Is going to make us stronger security for the world? What is going on?
You know, I sometimes I don't want to answer about the future. Why? Because the future is uncertain. It's uncertain. You know, sometimes you can predict. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball to say this is going to happen. You know, I can only speculate. Okay. Now, if you ask me, the the reasoning behind, or what's the purpose, or what's the goal? Well, the goal, first of all, is to avoid having a nuclear country to decimate or even erase Israel out of the Middle East. Okay, that's one of what that's I can say it. That's one of the primary goals. Why? Well, again, like I said in the beginning, Israel is the only democratic country in the Middle East. Now,
Mhm.
is Israel perfect? No, it's not. No. Is Israel a saint? No, it's not. Is Israel, good in everything it does? No, it's not. You know, like any other country, it does some things good, and it commits errors in other things. Because there is no perfect government. You know, we can see it in the United States, we can see it in Europe, we can see it, in the Middle East, and we can see it, in the Far East, in Asia. We can see it, you know, because there is no such thing as a perfect government. Again, like you, I'm a Christian. If I want a Christian um, perfection in the government, I am the one who believes that I will have to wait for the eternal kingdom of God, those millennia, those 1,000 years where Jesus himself is going to reign on this earth. That's going to be a perfect government. But until then, there's no such thing as a perfect government. Now, some people, for them, there is easy to say, Israel is bad or United States is bad. But the goal of all this, situation is to make the Middle East safer. You know, and people say, "Well, look what happened in Iraq. Look what happened in Afghanistan," and they have a valid point.
Yes.
They have a valid point. Look what happened in Iraq. Look what happened in Afghanistan. Now,
What is happening in Venezuela? Hmm.
exactly. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that sometimes, we have to look at the whole picture. We cannot look at only a little slice of the picture. We have to look at the whole picture. For example, I am a veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and some other conflicts around the world. So, at least in Iraq and Afghanistan, I know for a fact that we were not able to complete the whole mission. Why? Because,
Mm-hmm.
true, a lot of soldiers were being killed, you know, and then the public opinion changed. You know, September 11th happened. Oh, let's go get them, boys. Let's go get them. So we send the boys to go get them. But then people think that war can be won in 1, 2, 3 days, 1, 2, 3 weeks, 1, 2, 3 months, and so on and so
Mm.
forth. When sometimes war is not won as simple as saying. That's why when you ask me, what's going to happen, I cannot say because
Mm.
we don't know how it's going to evolve. We don't know how it's going to actually, what's going to happen, on the field. I always say, that I myself, I was the leader of units where I plan until the last detail, and I thought I had a perfect plan. And when I put it into motion, they fail. I failed.
Mm.
Why? Because you cannot plan every single detail. There is always a variable. Why? Because you're not God.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot plan for everything. You are not omniscient. You are not omnipresent. You see, we cannot plan for everything. I'm not, dismissing errors. No, no, errors are committed. Errors were committed. Yes, but we have to also understand that war by itself is chaos, and some people don't want to understand that. They think, that war is just black and white. No, no, no. War is
No, it's not.
chaos. Sometimes we try to make it an organized chaos, but still a chaos. Still a chaos, and you cannot remove the chaos out of the equation. And without realizing that, for you it's simple to say, oh, war is so, wait, let's just 2 3 bombs and let's withdraw. No, even withdrawal
Mm-mm.
is a chaos, but it has to be a controlled chaos. And for example, with Afghanistan, when we pull from Afghanistan, all of a sudden, without a clear plan of pulling out, guess what happened? We're seeing the same thing with Iraq. You know, we have to have clear plans. Now, the question then becomes, oh, do we have a clear plan now? Well, that's a problem. Why? Because even the plans, we cannot disclose plans. Because if we disclose plans, a lot of people start, divulging plans. Look at what happened to this journalist, Geraldo Rivera, I believe.
Oh, a
You know,
disaster.
yeah, but did he had the desire to disclose specifics about a mission? You know, but his cameraman and Geraldo disclose, a mission.
Yeah.
So why? Because for me, it was a bad idea. It was because we wanted to give the freedom to the press to allow press people to be embedded, and then that from then on we had embedded journalism, that you embedded 2 or 3 or 4 journalists into an operation so they can report live or take
Mm.
portions of an event or an operation, and they can report later. That's a bad idea, because some people forgot to obscure the faces. Some people reveal certain weapons. Some people reveal, the faces of the people that were helping the troops. They sometimes, they obscure the faces of the troops, but since the agreement was to obscure the faces of the troops, they forgot to obscure the faces of the people that were helping. So, so in retrospect, the will we make a safer world? In my opinion, maybe yes. We will make a safer world. Um, we will make a better world. Maybe we have to ask that to the Iranians. You know, if we are able to liberate, you know, to avoid, murders in every single square in Iran, I will say yes. But I'm not. It's like when I tell people, it's easy for people to judge governments or to judge militaries when you are not there fighting the war. It's easy to be giving an opinion from here, because I'm not there suffering.
Yeah.
I'm not there fighting. I'm not there suffering the consequences. See, when I hear people, oh, look at what happened, in Gaza. Look what happened here. What happened there? Sir, have you ever served in the military? Have
Mm-hmm.
you ever served in the Middle East? Have you ever observed what is happening in the Middle East with your own eyes?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever actually seen what's going on there? Because what you're doing here, the protests that you're doing here, the rallies that you're doing over here, if you do it over there, you will not survive. You
Yes.
know, it's like they say, LGTBs for Free Palestine. Okay, that's okay. I agree with that. Here in the United States, the Constitution protects that expression, but don't try to shove it up my throat or
Mm-hmm.
down my throat. You know, because if you try to do the same thing over there, guess
Hmm.
what's going to happen? That's because we have a constitution that allows you to do that. So don't be degrading the country that is allowing you to do that when the country that you are defending will kill you for doing that. It's as simple as that.
Absolutely.
And we have, it's like what you said, in Venezuela. Did we do a good thing in Venezuela? Well, I can say yes, but the question that I have to ask myself: how are the people reacting? How how safe do people feel? How is the economy reacting? How is the actual people that live there feeling about the situation? Okay, but then, for example, here in my location, where I live, people were saying, "Oh, look, now the United States is supporting the Chavistas, and they're complaining about that he was supporting, los Maduristas."
Hmm.
Okay, and I said, "Okay, you have a reason to say that." And again, if I defend the Constitution of the United States, I have to agree to disagree with you. But the thing is, and the problem is that if I create a vacuum of power, who feels that vacuum of power? Worse people, the same people, or you have people that would fight for that vacuum? That would then the people that is in the middle of that fight. will suffer
Hmm.
even worse than what happened to
Yes.
create, because we created the vacuum. And they say, well,
Mm.
so in the sense of a strategist, in the sense of a political and geopolitical analyst, we have to say, okay, wait a minute. I have to leave someone in charge that has the power to control others. At least that we can say, hold on a minute, control your troops, control the government, control the different departments, the different offices, until I can find someone who will follow the rule of law. Because if we live in a vacuum, and that happens everywhere, because we have to go back into history. Let's look at Afghanistan. Let's look into Iraq. Let's look right now into Iran. Let's look. Some people. That's why sometimes I feel like I'm preaching, I'm talking, I'm teaching to the air. What happened in Lebanon? What happened in Gaza? Gaza had a democratic elected government. But when Lebanon started, their revolution, what happened? All we have to do is read history without prejudice.
Yes.
Read history. What I have two mandatory, you know, textbooks in my classes: The Art of War and the Bible. And it's not because I'm teaching religion, it's not because I'm proselyting. No. The Art of War teach you strategy, teach you, how to know your enemy, how to react to your enemy. The Bible gives you plenty of examples of politics, of government, of war, of love, and a lot of treason. And good advisors, bad advisors, you name it, it's there. And from a clear perspective, without biases. Because one of the things that for me, the Bible is that the Bible doesn't hide anything from anybody. It tells you when the man fell, it tells you when the kings were good and when the kings were bad. It doesn't hide anything. And I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking
Yes.
about history. So again, trying to explain a lot to tell you that I don't know what's going to happen to the at the end of this conflict, because we erroneously say war, and we have to understand that war is only when it's declared. Everything else is a conflict. We cannot say Vietnam War. No, war was never declared during Vietnam. It was a conflict. We cannot say the Afghan war. No,
Mm.
never was declared. It was a conflict. Iraq war never was a war. The only war that was declared well, the only two wars that were declared during the 20th century was the First and the Second World War. Everything else has been a conflict. Why? Because they haven't been declared.
Mm.
And that's why, if you see,
Oh.
again, when people talk about politics and say, oh, we want the Democrats want the Congress to be involved. Well, they want the world powers to be involved, because then they will have other stuff to say and other stuff to do and some other powers. You see, again, there is a lot of involvement in politics and geopolitics and economic, policy and all that stuff. So it's a lot of involvement on all this. The same thing with the war right now, or the conflict right now, is that there is a lot in place. There is economic in place. It's a lot of positioning in place. A lot of
Mhm.
countries. And if you see, and there is another problem subject, look at what happened to NATO, you know, what happened to the Strait of Hormuz. So it's a lot of stuff, that we probably need, a class of a whole semester to discuss only the current situation in Iran.
Yeah, it brings, you have to bring a lot of elements to the table and analyze everything and put it all together. So it's very complicated. Now that you mentioned the difference between wars and conflicts, there is a new element in the military conversation. For the first time, artificial intelligence has been used in a combat. It brings a level of superiority on the United States military forces that it hasn't been seen before. Do you think this is going to help you in every single time that you need to use military forces, or this can become into something that may weaken you in a moment when you need to use military forces, military people in a conflict?
That's a double-edged sword, to be honest. For example,
Mm,
we have to understand one thing.
yeah.
United States is not the only one that uses artificial intelligence. Okay. Iran, for example,
Yes.
Iran has a very strong cyber capability. Iran, if I say that Iran doesn't have a strong cyber capability, cyber, referring about the use of computer systems, networks, and of course, saying meaning also in that artificial intelligence, I will be lying. Since we are truth seekers, we have to say, you know, Iran has one of the best, artificial intelligence or cyber, capabilities out there. They do, you know. The same with Israel, the same with the United States, the same with China, the same with Russia, and so many others. Artificial intelligence, the use of cyberspace, is not unique, and it is not the first time. This is the first time that we see it publicly, but it's not the first time, and it will make things very difficult. Why? Not so much in the theater, on the war itself, fighting the war. Why? Because each one of the countries have their own way to deter, those attacks. The problem is going to be what we see today with the people. You know, a lot of those countries are using cyber intelligence to deceive people, are using cyber intelligence to guide misinformation. For example, what happened a few days ago when CNN said, oh, these are the 10 points that Iran has agreed to, and the United States has said yes. Not even 3 minutes later, CNN had to withdraw that information because it was discovered, and actually a unit of the United States, of the government, had to tell CNN, guys, you've been you've been dubbed, because what you're saying is not true. And immediately their cybersecurity specialists check, and it was true. They were, why? Because a major outlet like CNN, and I'm not a fan of CNN, but a major outlet that has to check their information beforehand in the speed that they want to, work, because they want to be the first one to spill the beans. They want to be, the headliners. They consume something that wasn't true. Who sent it? Well, I'm not going to start speculations. The thing is that artificial intelligence was used to dupe a major news organization. And you have people that grab that information. They don't see that that major organization not even 3 minutes later, withdrew that information, but the people that got that information from that organization kept going with the same wrong information. So then you see,
Mm-mm.
okay, wait a minute, and they swear they're waiting to lose their their head that what they're saying is true because CNN published it. But wait a minute, did you actually check with CNN again to see what happened to that information? Did you check with the people that actually spew that lie? Were they aware of a lie, or they are willing participants of that lie? Because nowadays
Mm-hmm.
you have to be that cynical. You have to be that cynical. You have to say, okay, what Jennifer and Daniel are speaking, is it true? And that's why I tell everyone every time I write, that's why when I write, if it's based on information that can be verified, I say I give my sources, I give my references. If it's from a book, I want people to go and check that book, to check the reference, to see, okay, what
Yes.
Daniel is saying is not, that he said, oh, let me come up with that, some information. Because some people say, oh, my resources or
Mm-hmm.
my information is from private resources. Oh, I'm a journalist, I'm not going to divulge information. And sometimes, and that's where the cynicism comes, that's just a theater to come up with information that is not information, is misinformation.
Mm-mm.
This is where I become a little bit of information technology, teacher, and I say the difference between information and data is just a bunch of stuff that it has not been processed. Information is when you take that data and process it and verify it, then becomes information. Because data by itself doesn't become information. If you don't verify that data, if you don't, depure that data, it's not information. It's just a bunch of words. It's just a bunch of manure that you have.
Yeah.
You have to go through that data in order to make that data make sense. And when you make that data make sense, then it becomes information. But makes sense with the truth. And that's what's lacking in some of our journalists nowadays. They just want to grab something, and they don't spend the time to actually look over, because they want to be the first one to have the headlines. They want to be the first one to exploit, the wow factor. They
Yeah.
want to be the first one to have, the more impact on the news cycle, to have the more impact, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, on whatever, outlet they have available. So then we have to actually, we have the responsibility to see through this, to see through all that things that are being said. But we are lazy. We are extremely lazy. We don't want to
Yeah.
verify. We just want to consume. We just want to consume, and we don't want to verify, because we assume. And I don't know if you have heard this before, but if you assume according to the way you divide assume, it will make an ass out of you and me. Assume. And that's
Yeah.
why we cannot assume. We have to verify. Because some people, and you know what's the worst thing? That if I make an error, if I make a mistake, I'm willing to accept that I make a mistake. I'm willing to correct it. Not only accept it, I'm willing to correct it. And I have done so in a few times. When I have made a mistake, hey, I'm human. I'm not perfect. I don't know everything. Ooh, I have made a lot of mistakes. And I have to, write it and say, I made a mistake. And I write the correct version. But there are a lot of people around us that they on purpose mislead, lie, and cover a lot of stuff that they know is not true. And even if they don't know it's not true, when they realize it's not true, they do not make clarifications on their writings, on their posts, or anywhere. Now, the question that sometimes, I ask myself is why people follow them? Because I know, like President Bush once said,
That's the $1 million question.
like President Bush once said, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And that's something that we don't want to accept, that we've been fooled more than twice. Up to you.
Yeah.
I'm ready for the next question.
That's that's a lesson I've learned. Uh, that's a lesson I've learned the hard way back in January. For those who doesn't know me, I am half Venezuelan, half Puerto Rican. I live in Venezuela, and I witnessed everything that happened in January the 3rd. And I'm a contributor for a news outlet in India. They called me right there when the bombing and the explosion was happening, and I've told them, so far what I've seen and what I know is A, B, C, D, E. But if you allow me, and I said this live, I remember the moment exactly where I said it. I said, please allow me to get back in a couple of hours because I need to check my sources, meaning Daniel, to know exactly what happened because I'm not quite sure what is going on. And they were like, okay, do what you have to do. We called you back. And actually, I came back live after in the afternoon, and then I have the complete puzzle of what's happened, who did it, who didn't, and all the details. But I agree with you, Daniel. I do not understand why people seems to be like enchanted to follow these talkers. uh and when you come out with the truth and the facts, that's the main thing. They don't believe you and they demonize you. So I don't get it what happened here, but eventually we will find out. I have a last question. This time I would like to talk about Cuba. I find very interesting how the process has been developing. Do you think that the approach the Trump administration had with Cuba, the speed of the conversations, the way things have been happening, is because of the devastation Cuba has after 67 years of communism, or there's maybe another reason behind this?
Well, there is a lot of factors, that you have to take into consideration with Cuba. First, Cuba, it will not happen. At least it's my belief. Okay, that it will not happen the same thing that happened in Venezuela. Why? Because Cuba is too close to the United States. It's extremely close. It's only 85, 90 miles. Okay. So Cuba is at a striking distance to Florida, or actually striking distance to any part of the East Coast. That's the first thing. When I say striking distance, is that even though the MiGs, talking about the airplanes, the fighters airplanes that the Cuba have, are old, because they are,
Yeah.
some are 25, 30 years old. But if you take into consideration the F-15, the F-16 are 35 years old. Of course, the maintenance in the United States is a lot better, and they get rebuilt X amount of times during the years. But one of the reasons that the people are going hungry in Cuba is because most of the monies that they have in Cuba, they were going towards the military.
Mm-hmm.
So their planes and their armament, their weapons, it's not that they are the last uh, you know, of of the technology, but they're still working. And let's face it, the Cuban army at one point, was trained by the Soviets. When before the Soviets, uh, before the Soviet Union fell. Now the Soviets are no longer in power. Is the Russia, but still Russia was still helping Cuba. And again, that's why I say that sometimes some talkers, like you say, don't take a lot of things into consideration. You say, oh, it's going to the same thing that happened in Venezuela is going to happen. Cuba's next. Well, you have to take a lot into
Yeah.
consideration. Again, so a striking distance means that one of those MiGs, even though the United States has a lot of airplanes, but it would only take one airplane to go through the defense of the United States to be successful, only one to be successful, and it will cause an uproar in the United States if one airplane, even if it decides to do like a kamikaze, like Japanese, or drops a bomb or a
Hmm.
missile and causes, even one death in US soil, it will destroy the president and the presidency of whoever is in the presidency at the time. Think
Yes.
about it. Just think about it. So
Mm-hmm.
if that happens, the question is, which president is going to take that risk? If I
Mm-hmm.
were, an advisor to the president, I would say, President, let's not take that chance. Why we will put our East Coast to a risk that is unnecessary? Not only that, if we decide to bomb the hell out of Cuba, guess what's going to happen to all those
Mm-hmm.
Cubans that are in Miami, little Cuba? Because they still have people in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
They want Cuba to be free, but
Yes.
not through military action. Because some of the people or the families that they have
Mm-hmm.
in Cuba, they might be killed. And believe it or not, a lot of those Cubans are the ones that elect most of the elected officials in Miami, Jacksonville, Orlando, Miami Beach, Key
Yep.
West. So, again, which president will take that risk? And like it or not, most of
Mm-hmm.
those Cubans vote Republican. So, again, That's why when geopolitical analysts, we take serious time when we ponder about these issues. We cannot go with emotions. Do we want Cuba to be free? Of course. They've been suffering for the last 70 years, give or take.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course we want Cuba to be free. But we have to search and we have to seek the best possible outcome. Do we always find the best possible outcome? The answer is no. But at least we have to try if they really want to. But military is not an option, because militarily we have to understand that Cuba is too. It's like saying, okay, the independent movement in Puerto Rico. Do you think that if
Oh.
they were strong enough, they will launch an attack from Vieques to Puerto Rico?
Mm,
No,
mm,
it's too close, because the forces in Puerto Rico will
yeah.
destroy them in Vieques.
Yes.
So, and that's just an electronic, comparison. I'm not saying that the independentistas want to do that. Just in case people say, "Oh, Daniel is saying," no, no, no. It's just hypothetical. Yeah, you know. Uh, let's say that yeah, the Taínos want to. Well, no, let's not use them because there's yeah. Let me not get in trouble. So you get the idea. We have to be very, very careful when we suggest, or even worse, sometimes, and this is in general, this is only related to Cuba. Sometimes some talkers on the different social media, without knowing, they're giving ideas to the bad actors. They are giving ideas to bad actors. They're saying, "Oh, United States is building so and so so next to so and so so so." I say, "Really? Are you saying that? You know that you're giving the bad actors an idea to bomb that place that you just mentioned? They maybe they didn't think about it, but now that you mention that place, it makes sense for them to do that." So people, when they start spewing stuff, they are helping the enemy, because believe it or not, people that you're watching this, a lot of people are reading the social media outlets out there. A lot of people are reading social media. Some are just for entertainment
Yes.
purposes, some are just because they're bored, and some are because they're looking for targets. And this is not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. So Cuba is a very is very, 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 very unique. And if you see Cuba now, you will see that they're slowly but surely they're opening up. They're opening up. So I would think that they will be
Yeah.
more easily approached through diplomacy. I do believe 100%, and I believe with all my heart that diplomacy is the best way to reach an agreement in any possible scenario. Diplomacy is the way to go. But sometimes when diplomacy doesn't work, I do believe in the use of power without hesitation, because I have seen
Definitely.
both. Yeah, I have seen
Thank you so
both.
much. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Sure. Anytime that you
Yeah.
need a way to get into trouble, just let me know.
Oh, yeah. I'm really grateful and thankful with you for giving me time to talk to you and make the panorama a little bit clearer for me and for the audience. Thank you from the bottom
Sure.
of my heart for joining me on this very edition of the show.
Sure. You're welcome.
Well, remember to follow us. Remember to follow us in social media everywhere. You can find us as Politics for Thinkers. Also, our website, we're working on that in order to have it really ready for you to watch it and see it. Politicsforthinkers.com. This is it for today. See you in 7 days, in a week. Thank you for joining us. God bless us. Bye bye.
Thank you for watching Politics for Thinkers.